Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are on to the last part of Journal Collection number 55, dating from the year 1864, and we are up to September 21st of that year. Honorable Liluf Stanley, Wendell Phillips, and Agassiz, Channing, and Alcott here. Agassiz is really a man of great ability, breadth, and resources, a rare and rich nature, and always maintains himself, in all companies and on all occasions. I carried him to Mrs. Mann's, and afterwards to Bull's, and in each house he gave the fittest counsel in the best way. At the town hall he made an excellent speech to the farmers, extemporaneous of course, but with method and mastery, on the question of the location of the agricultural college, urging the claims of Cambridge. Judge French followed him with a very good statement of the history of the affair from the beginning until now. Agassiz thinks that if he could get a calf elephant, and young enough, that is, before birth, he should find the form of the mastodon. That if he could get a tapir calf before birth, he should find the form of the megatherion. But at present these are practical impossibilities, as they require hundreds of dissections, hundreds, that is, of live subjects. September 24th. Yesterday with Ellery walked through Becky Stowe's hole, dry shod hitherto, a feat for muskrats alone. The sky and air and autumn woods in their early best. This year the river, meadows all dry and permeable to the walker. But why should nature always be on the gallop? Look now, and instantly you shall never see it. Not 10 minutes repose allowed. Incessant whirl. And 'tis the same with my companion's genius. You must carry a stenographic press in your pocket to save his commentaries on things and men, or they are irrecoverable. I tormented my memory just now in vain to restore a witty criticism of his, yesterday on a book. Though love recoil and reason chafe, there came a voice without reply. 'Tis man's perdition to be safe, when for the truth he ought to die. The American nationality is now within the Republican party, hence its serenity. In like manner, in view of all the nationalities of the world, the battle of humanity is now in the American Union, and hence the weakness of English and European opposition. Napoleon's word, that in 25 years the United States would dictate the politics of the world, was a little early, but the sense was just, with a Jewish interpretation of the 40 days and 70 weeks. It is true that if we escape bravely from the present war, America will be the controlling power. Editor's note. Grieved at his friend's willful hostility towards our country in its struggle for integrity and freedom, Mr. Emerson wrote to Carlyle, September 26, these words: I have in these last years lamented that you have not made the visit to America which in earlier years you projected. It would have made it impossible that your name should be cited for one moment on the side of the enemies of mankind. 10 days' residence in this country would have made you the organ of sanity of England and of Europe to us and to them, and have shown you the necessities and aspirations which struggle up in our free states, which as yet have no organ to others, and are ill and unsteadily articulated here. Ah, how gladly I would enlist you with your thunderbolt on our part! How gladly enlist the wise, thoughtful, efficient pens and voices of England! Are English of this day incapable of a great sentiment? Can they not leave cavilling at petty failures and bad manners and at the dunce part, always the largest part in human affairs, and leap to the suggestions and finger-pointing of the gods, which above the understanding feed the hopes and guide the wills of men? This war has been conducted over the heads of all the actors in it. Carlyle Emerson Correspondence, Volume 2, pages 285 and 286. End note. 'Tis a defect in our manners that they have not yet reached the prescribing a term to visits. What a pity that beauty is not the rule, since everybody might have been handsome as well as not. Or if the moral laws must have their revenge, like Indians, for every violation, what pity that everybody is not promoted on the battlefield as our generals are, that is, instantly embellished by a good action. My servant squints and steals. I persuade her to better behavior. She restores the long-lost trinkets, embroidered purse, and at the same time the strabismus should be healed. Manners. What a harness of buckram wealth in city life put on our poets and literary men, even when men of great parts. Alcott complained to me of want of simplicity in Lowell, Holmes, Ward, and Longfellow, and Alcott is the right touchstone to test them. True litmus to detect the acid. Agassiz is perfectly accessible, has brave manliness which can meet a peasant, a mechanic, or a fine gentleman with equal fullness. Henry James is not spoiled. Bryant is perfect. New York has not hurt him. Whittier is unspoiled. Wasson is good company for prince or plowman. Rouse also. I should be glad if James Lowell were as simple noble as his cousin Frank Lowell, who, my wife once said, appeared like a king. C.T. has perfect manners. Charles Newcome and Channing are saved by genius. Thoreau was with difficulty sweet. A.W. has never left her broad humanity, and suggests so much that is told of Madame Récamier. But in all the living circle of American wits and scholars is no enthusiasm. Alcott alone has it. Enthusiasm a delight, but may not always be a virtue, wrote Aunt Mary. The enthusiast will not be irritated, sour, and sarcastic. Wealth of nature the only good. 'Tis vain to accuse scholars of solitude and merchants of miserliness. They are really so poor that they cannot help it. Poverty is universal. Ah, blessed ocean, 'tis good to find enough of one thing. Genius delights because of its opulence. We scorn the poor littérateurs who hide their want by patchwork of quotations and borrowings, and the poor artist who, instead of the rapid drawing on a single conception, laboriously etches after his model with innumerable stipplings. What a saving grace is in poverty and solitude, that the obscure youth learns the practice instead of the literature of his virtues. 1 or 2 or 3 ideas are the gods of his temple, and suffice him for intellect and heart for years. They condescend to his shoe shop or his hoe and scythe and threshing floor. The solitary worshipper knows the essence of the thought. The scholar in society sees only its fair face. Aunt Mary writes, after all, some of the old Christians were more delivered from external things than the modern speculative, who are anxious for society, books, ideas, and become sensitive to all that affects the organs of thought. A few single grand ideas which become objects, pursuits, and all in all. Aunt Mary and her contemporaries spoke continually of angels and archangels with a good faith, as they would have spoken of their parents or their late minister. Now the word palls, all the credence gone. The war at last appoints the generals, in spite of parties and presidents. Every one of us had his pet at the start, but none of us appointed Grant, Sherman, Sheridan, and Farragut, none but themselves. Yet these are only shining examples. The fruit of small powers and virtues is as fixed. The harvest of potatoes is not more sure than the harvest of every talent. Great difference in life of 2 consecutive days. Now it has grip, tastes the hours, fills the horizon, and presently it recedes, as little possession is somnambulic. We read often with as much talent as we write. The retrospective value of a new thought is immense. 'Tis like a torch applied to a long train of powder. A page of Aunt Mary's gives much to think of the felicity of greatness on low ground of condition, as we have so often thought a rich Englishman has better lot than a king. No fair object but affords me gratification and with common interests. Again she writes, they, probably the common farming people about her, knew by hearsay of apes of men, vampire despots, crawling sycophants. Criticism. I read with delight a casual notice of Wordsworth in the London Reader, in which, with perfect aplomb, his highest merits were affirmed, and his unquestionable superiority to all English poets since Milton. And though how long I travelled and talked in England, and found no person, or none but one, and that one Clough, sympathetic with him, and admiring him aright in face of Tennyson's culminating talent, and genius in melodious verse. What struck me now was the certainty in which the best opinion comes to be the established opinion. This rugged, rough countryman walks and sits alone, assured of his sanity and his inspiration, and writes to no public, sneered at by Jeffrey and Brougham, branded by Byron, blackened by the gossip of Barry Cornwall and De Quincey, down to Bowring, for they all had disparaging tales of him, yet himself no more doubting the fine oracles that visited him than if Apollo had brought them visibly in his hand. And here and there a solitary reader in country places had felt and owned them. And now, so few years later, it is lawful in that obese material England, whose vast strata of population are nowise converted or altered, yet to affirm unblamed, unresisted, that this is the genuine and the rest the impure metal. For in their sane hours each of the fine minds in the country has found it, and imparted his conviction, so that every reader has somewhat heard it on the highest authority. And thus the world is brought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. English genius is more truly shown in the drawings in Punch than in all their watercolor and Royal Academy exhibitions, just as their actors are dreary in tragedy and admirable in low comedy. Criticism. Dr. Holmes one day said to me that he disliked scientific matter introduced into literary lectures. It was meretricious. Prodigality of nature. She can afford millions of lives of men to make the movement of the earth round the sun so much as suspected. How much time a man's poetic experiences cost him. He abandons business and wealth for them. How much time love costs him. The time I lost pursuing the light which lies in woman's eyes has been my heart's undoing. Ah, yes, but if his love was well directed, it has been his mind's upbuilding. How often I have to say that every man has material enough in his experience to exhaust the sagacity of Newton in working it out. We have more than we use. We know vastly more than we digest. I never read poetry or hear a good speech at a caucus or a cattle show, but it adds less stock to my knowledge than it apprises me of admirable uses to which what I knew can be turned. I write this now in remembrance of some structural experience of last night, a painful waking out of dreams as by violence and a rapid succession of quasi-optical shows, following like a pyrotechnic exhibition of architectural or grotesque flourishes, which indicate magazines of talent and invention in our structure, which I shall not arrive at the control of in my time, but perhaps my great-grandson will mature and bring today. October 9th. Yesterday at Mr. George L. Stearns, at Medford, to meet Wendell Phillips and Mr. Fowler of Tennessee. The conversation political altogether, and though no very salient points, yet useful to me as clearing the air and bringing to view the simplicity of the practical problem before us. Right-minded men would very easily bring order out of our American chaos if the working with courage and without buy-ins. These Tennessee slaveholders in the land of Midian are far in advance of our New England politicians. They see and front the real questions. One point would seem to be absolute: emancipation, establishing the fact that the United States henceforward knows no color, no race in its law, but legislates for all alike, one law for all men. It was good in Fowler, his marked though obscure recognition of the higher element that works in affairs. We seem to do it, it gets done. but for our will in it, it is much as if I claimed to have manufactured the beautiful skin and flavor of my pears. Certain memorable words, expressions that flew out incidentally in late history, as for example in Lincoln's letter, "To all whom it may concern, are caught up by men, go to England, go to France," re-echo thence with thunderous report to us, and they are no longer the unconsidered words they were, but we must hold the government to them. They are powers, and are not to be set aside by reckless speeches of Seward putting all afloat again. October 12th. Returned from Nashon, whither I went on Saturday the 8th with Professor Goldwin Smith of Oxford University, Mr. Charles B. Sedgwick, John Weiss, and George C. Ward. Mr. Forbes at Nashon is the only squire in Massachusetts, and no nobleman ever understood or performed his duties better. I divided my admiration between the landscape of Nashon and him. He is an American to be proud of. Never was such force, good meaning, good sense, good action combined with such domestic, lovely behavior, and such modesty and persistent preference of others. Wherever he moves, he is the benefactor. It is, of course, that he should shoot well, ride well, sail well, administer railroads well, carve well, keep house well, but he was the best talker also in the company, with the perpetual practical wisdom seeing always the working of the thing, with the multitude and distinction of his facts, and one detects continually that he has had a hand in everything that has been done, and in the temperance with which he parries all offense and opens the eyes of his interlocutor without contradicting him. I have been proud of many of our countrymen, but I think this is a good country that can breed such a creature as John M. Forbes. There was something dramatic in the conversation of Monday night between Professor Goldwin Smith, Forbes, and Ward, chiefly the Englishman being evidently alarmed at the near prospect of the retaliation of America standing in the incidental position soon in which England now and lately has stood to us, and playing the same parts towards her. Forbes a year ago was in Liverpool and London entreating them to respect their own neutrality and disallow the piracy and the blockade running in hard measure to us in their colonial ports, etc. And now, so soon, the parts were entirely reversed, and Professor Smith was showing us the power and irritability of England, and the certainty that war would follow if we should build and arm a ship in one of our ports, send her out to sea, and at sea sell her to the enemy, which would be a proceeding strictly in accordance with her present proclaimed law of nations. Forbes thinks the Americans are in such a temper towards England that they will do this if the opportunity occurs. When the American government urged England to make a new treaty to adjust and correct this anomalous rule, the English government refused, and 'tis only ignorance that has prevented the rebel Confederacy from availing themselves of it. Mr. Smith had never heard of J. Garth Wilkinson, nor had the Trollops heard of Elizabeth Shepherd, nor scarcely any English 15 years ago of Browning. At Nashon I recall what John Smith said of the Bermudas, and I think as well of Mr. Forbes's fences, which are cheap and steep. No place known had better walls or a broader ditch. What complete men are Forbes, Agassiz, and Rockwood Hoare! I came away from Nashon saying to myself of John Forbes how little this man suspects, with his sympathy for men and his respect for lettered and scientific people, that he is not likely ever to meet a man superior to himself. The dire, and then there's two untranslated Greek words, is that which I used to long for in orators. I can still remember the imposing march of Otis's eloquence, which, like Burke's, swept into all styles of address, all varieties of tone and incident, and in its skirts far flashed the red artillery. In modern eloquence, what is more touching or sublime than the first words of Lafayette's speech in the French Assembly in 1815, when, after so many years' silence, the whole consulate and empire, I raise a voice which the friends of liberty will still recognize, etc. Nemesis is that recoil of nature, not to be guarded against which ever surprises the most wary transgressor of the laws. Not possibly can you shut up all the issues. Saint Beuve notes in 1838 the charming letters of Lafayette to his wife just published. The age and the hour. The party of virility rules the hour. The party of ideas and sentiments rule the age. October 19th. Yesterday, as I passed Shannon's Field, robins, blackbirds, bluebirds, and snowbirds were enjoying themselves together. New York, October 20th. Bryant has learned where to hang his titles, namely by tying his mind to autumn woods, winter mornings, rain, brooks, mountains, evening winds, and wood-birds. Who speaks of these is forced to remember Bryant. He is American, never despaired of the Republic, dared name a jay and a gentian crows also. His poetry is sincere. I think of the young poets that they have seen pictures of mountains and seashores, but in this that he has seen mountains and has the staff in his hand. It occurred in talking with Henry James yesterday, who attached a too exclusive originality to Swedenborg, that he did not seem to recognize the eternal co-presence of the revolutionary force. The revolutionary force in intellect is never absent. Such persons as my poor Platonist Taylor in Amesbury, Jones Very, and the shoemaker at Berwick. Tufts in Lima or Cuba, New York, are always appearing in the deadest conservatism, in an age of antiquaries representing the most modern times. In the heart of papacy and Toryism, the seat of rebellion, for the world is ever equal to itself, and centripedence makes centrifugens. October 25th. Power of certain states of the sky. There is an astonishing magnificence even in this low town, and within a quarter of a mile of my doors, in the appearance of the Lincoln Hills now dressed in their colored forest, under the lights and clouds of morning, as I saw them at 8 o'clock. When I see this spectacle so near and so surprising, I think no house should be built quite low or should obstruct the prospect by trees. America makes its own precedents. The imperial voice of the age cannot be heard for the tin horns and charivari of the varlets of the hour, such as the London Times, Blackwood's, and the Saturday Review. But already these clackers have received their cue. I suppose it was hinted to them that the American people are not always to be trifled with. They are ending their home war, and are exasperated at English bad behavior, and are enforced to destroy English trade. Speak them fair, and the Times has just discovered what temper, valor, constancy the Union has shown in the war, and what a noble career of honor and prosperity lies before her, etc. When a lady rallied Adam Smith on his plain dress, he pointed to his well-bound library and said, "You see, madame, I am a beau in my books." The farmer in his month is very patient of his coarse attire, and thinks, "At least I am a beau in my woods." October 30th. At club yesterday we had a full table: Agassiz, Hoare, Hedge, Cabot, Holmes, Appleton, Pierce, Norton, Forbes, Ward, Sumner, Whipple, Woodman, Dwight, Emerson, Andrew, who with the Brimmer and Fields was elected yesterday, and for guests Mr. C. G. Loring, Sterry Hunt, and Mr. Godkin, the English correspondent of the Daily News. Before the war, our patriotism was a firework, a salute, a serenade for holidays and summer evenings, but the reality was cotton threads and complacence. Now the deaths of thousands and the determination of millions of men and women show it real. Rich are the sea gods who give gifts, but they, all hidden gems are theirs. But power is theirs, they give it to the wise, for every wave is wealth to Daedalus, wealth to the cunning artist who can work the wave's immortal sinew. November 18th. The way that young woman keeps her school was the best lesson I received in the preparatory school today. She knew so much and carried it so well in her head, and gave it out so well that the pupils had quite enough to think of, and not an idle moment to waste on noise or disorder. 'Tis the best recipe I know for school discipline. November 26th. Agassiz, Bremer, Cabot, Holmes, Hoare, Fields, Dana, Norton, Sumner, Whipple, Emerson at the club, and Senator Wilson, M. Logel, and M. Duvernay de Horan guests. I promise Sumner to attend to the question of the academy. Cows are dull, sluggish creatures, but with a decided talent in one direction, for extracting milk out of meadows. Mine have a genius for it, leaking cream, larding the lean earth as they walk along. Wasps, too, for making paper. Then what soothing objects are the hens. Bryant. His sincere, balanced mind has the enthusiasm which perception of nature inspires, but it did not tear him, only enabled him, gave him twice his power. He did not parade it, but hid it in his verse. His connection with party, usque ad aras, "true bard but simple," I fear he has not escaped the infirmity of fame, like the presidential malady, a virus once in, not to be got out of the system. He has this, so cold and majestic as he sits there, has this to a heat which has brought to him the devotion of all the young men and women who love poetry, and of all the old men and women who once were young. 'Tis a perfect tyranny. Talk of the shopmen who advertise their drugs or cosmetics on the walls and on the palisades and huge rocks along the railways. Why, this man, more cunning by far, has contrived to levy on all American nature, and subsidized every solitary forest and monument mountain in Berkshire or the Catskills, every waterfowl, every partridge, every gentian and goldenrod, the prairies, the gardens of the desert, the song of the stars, the evening wind, has bribed every one of these to speak for him, so that there is scarcely a feature of day and night in the country which does not, whether we will or not, recall the name of Bryant. This high-handed usurpation I charge him with, and on top of this, with persuading us and all mankind to hug our fetters and rejoice in our subjugation. The following is called Introduction to Lecture on Education in Course on American Life. Read at the Melodeon, November 1864, and the footnote states, soon after Lincoln had been elected president for a second term. I congratulate my countrymen on the great and good omens of the hour, that a great portion of mankind dwelling in the United States have given their decision in unmistakable terms in favor of social and statute order, that a nation shall be a nation, and refuses to hold its existence on the tenure of a casual rencontre of passengers, who meet at the corner of a street or on a railroad or at a picnic, held by no bond, but meeting and parting at pleasure, that a nation cannot be trifled with, but involves interests so dear and so vast that it is intolerable crime to treat them with levity. They shall be held binding as marriage, binding as contracts of property, binding as laws which guard the life and honor of the citizen. The people, after the most searching discussion of every part of the subject, have decided that the unity of the nation shall be held by force against the forcible attempts of parties to break it. What gives commanding weight to this decision is that it has been made by the people sobered by the calamity of the war, the sacrifice of life, the waste of property, the burden of taxes, and the uncertainties of the result. They protest in arms against the attempt of any small or any numerous minority of citizens or states to proceed by stealth or by violence to dispart a country. They do not decide that if a part of the nation, from geographical necessities or from irreconcilable interests to production and trade, desires separation, no such separation can be. Doubtless it may, because the permanent interest of one part to separate will come to be the interest and good will of the other part. But at all events it shall not be done in a corner, not by stealth, not by violence, but as a solemn act, with all the forms, with all deliberation, and on the declared opinions of the entire population concerned, and with mutual guarantees and compensations. I need not go over the statistics of the country. Those colossal lines are printed on your brain. These lines of land subject to one law are almost astronomical measures, containing a pretty large fraction of the planet. These grand material dimensions cannot suggest dwarfish and stunted manners and policy. Everything on this side the water inspires large and prospective action. America means opportunity, freedom, power. And very naturally, when these instincts have not been supported by adequate mental and moral training, they run into the grandiose, into exaggeration and vaporing. This is odious but inevitable. The inhabitants of the great republic are taxed with rudeness and superficiality. It was said of Louis XIV that his gait was becoming in a king, but in a private man would have been an insufferable strut. Still, when we are reproached with vaporing by people of small home territory, like the English, I often think that ours is the only gait and bearing of a tall boy, a little too large for his trousers, by the side of small boys. They are jealous, quick-sighted about their inches. But let us call bad manners by the right name. Don't take any pains to praise good people. I delight in certain dear persons, that they need no letters of introduction, knowing well that wherever they go, they are hung all over with eulogies. If there is any perception in the company, these will be found out as fountains of joy. Power of criticism. Logel said the other day that the French emperor censures and prohibits newspapers, but never meddles with books. But now I am glad to see Laboulaye in his critique on the life of Julius Caesar tosses Emperor Napoleon on his horns, and with invulnerable propriety. The late good and wise First Lord Ravensworth used to say, "There is nothing grateful but the earth. You cannot do too much for it. It will continue to pay tenfold the pains and labor bestowed upon it." Bewick's Life. Victor Cousin said in conversation about the encyclical letter that the Pope had missed an opportunity of keeping still which would never occur again. Editor's note. As in previous volumes, a few of Mr. Emerson's favorite authors from his very youth steadily recurring in the list of the first volumes as Homer, Plato, Plutarch, Montaigne, Bacon, Shakespeare, Milton, Herbert, Swedenborg, Wordsworth, and others are not given in this list. In spite, however, of the frequent mention of Plotinus, Proclus, and other Neoplatonists, and on the Oriental scriptures and poets, these names will appear as showing when Mr. Emerson was reading them. Carlyle and Goethe will also be mentioned. It often happens that an allusion to an author may be in a passage not included in the selections here printed. End note. And just as the editors have stated, as they don't repeat authors that Emerson writes of a lot, I have chosen, I forgot how far back, maybe by volume 4 or 5, to stop reading off the list of authors because it was just simply redundant and just not really worth doing. And with that said, this is the end of journal collection number 55, dating from the year 1864, when the author was 61 years old. Thank you for listening.